Section 86 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE. Section 86. Plato. Plato was a Greek philosopher who flourished about 426 BC, and kept on flourishing for 81 years after that, when he suddenly ceased to do so. He early took to poetry, but when he found that his poems were rejected by the Greek papers, he ceased writing poetry and went into the philosophy business. At the time, Greece had no regular philosopher, and so Plato soon got all he could do. Plato was a pupil of Socrates, who was himself no slouch of a philosopher. Many and many a day did Socrates take his little class of kindergarten philosophers up the shady banks of the Ilissus and sit all day discoursing to his pupils on deep and difficult doctrines while his unsandaled feet were bathed in the genial tide. Many happy hours were thus spent. Socrates would take his dinner or tell some wonderful tale to his class whereby he would win their dinner himself. Then in the deep Athenian shade with his bare Gothic feet in the clear calm waters of the Ilissus, he would eat the Grecian donut of his pupils, and while he spoke in poetic terms of his belief, he would dig his heel in the mud and heave a heartbroken sigh. Such was Socrates, the great teacher. He got a small salary and went barefoot till after Thanksgiving. He was a great tutor and boarded around teaching in the open air while the mosquitoes bit his bare feet. No tutor ever tutored with a more unselfish purpose or a smaller salary. Plato maintained, among other things, that evil is connected with matter, and aside from matter we do not find evil existing. That is true, at least such evil as we might find apart from matter would be outside the jurisdiction of a police court. I think Plato is correct. Evil and matter are inseparable. That's what's the matter. It is quite common for us to say that virtue is its own reward. Plato held that while it was better to be virtuous as a matter of economy and ultimate peace than not to be virtuous at all, he believed in being virtuous for a higher reason. Probably it was notoriety. He would rather be right than be president. He believed in being good just for the excitement of it, and the notice it would attract, and not because it paid. Plato was a great virtuoso. Socrates would have been called a crank if he had lived in our day and age, and if Plato were to go into London or New York and talk of organizing a society for the encouragement of virtue among adult male taxpayers, he would have lonesome time of it. Be virtuous and you will be happy was a favorite motto with Plato. The legend is still quoted by those who love to ransack the dead past. Pluto was quite another party, and some get him mixed up with Plato. They were not related in any way, Pluto being a son of Saturn and Rhea, who flourished at about the same time as Plato. Pluto was a brother of Jupiter and Neptune, and when the estate of Saturn was wound up, Jupiter wanted the Earth and he got it. Neptune wanted the codfish conservatory and the mermaid's home, so he took the deep, deep sea, and even yet he rides around in a gold-spangled stone boat on the pale green billows of the summer sea, jabbing a pickerel ever and anon with a three-pronged fork. He leads a gay life, going to picnics with the mermaids in their coral caves or attending their full evening dress parties clad in a trident and a fall beard. He loves the sea, the lone blue sea, and those who have seen him turning handsprings on a sponge lawn or riding in his watertight chariot with his feet over the dashboard beside a slim young mermaid with Paris green hair and dressed in a tight-fitting low-neck dorsal fin, say he is a lively old party. But Pluto was different. He stood around till the estate was all closed up, and it looked as though he had got left. Just then the administrator says, "Why, here's Pluto. He is going to come out of the little end of the horn. He will have to hustle for himself." Pluto resented this, and clinched with the administrator. They fought till each had a watch pocket of the brow and an Irish sunset symphony in green under the eye. While Jupiter and Neptune stood by and encouraged the fight, Jupiter rather took sides with his brother, and Neptune stood in with the administrator. In the midst of the confusion, Jupiter speaks up and says, "Swat him under the ear, Pluto," whereupon Neptune says to the administrator, "Give him hail." The administrator paused and said, "That was a good suggestion." He would do so, and so he forgave Pluto and gave him Sheol. The expensive word. Much that is annoying in this life is occasioned by the use of a high-priced word where a cheaper one would do. In these days of failure, shortage at both ends, and financial stringency generally, I often wonder that some people should go on day after day using just as extravagant language as they did during the flush times. When I get hard up, the first thing I do is to economize in my expressions in everyday conversation. If there is a marked stringency in business, I lay aside first my French, then my Latin, and finally my German. Should the times become greatly depressed and failures and assignments become frequent, I begin to lop off the large words in my own language, beginning with incomprehensibility, unconstitutionally, etc., etc. Julius Caesar's motto used to be, "Avoid an unusual word as you would rock at sea." And Jules is right about that too. Large and unusual words, especially in the mouths of ignorant people, are worse than rough-on rats in a boarding-house pie. Years ago, there used to be a pompous cuss in southern Wisconsin who was a self-made man. Extremely so. Those who used to hear him assert again and again that he was a self-made man always felt renewed confidence in the Creator. He rose one evening in a political meeting and, swelling out his bosom as his eagle eye rested on the chairman, he said, "Mr. Chairman, I move you that the chair do appoint a committee of 3 to attend to the matter under discussion, and that said committee be clothed by the chair with omniscient and omnipotent powers." The motion was duly seconded, and the chairman said he guessed that it wouldn't be necessary to put it to a vote. "I guess it will be all right, Mr. Pinkham. I guess there'll be no declivity to that." And so the committee was appointed and clothed with omniscient and omnipotent powers, there being no declivity to it. We had a self-made lawyer at one time in the northern part of the state who would rather find a 75-cent word and use it in a speech where it did not belong than to eat a good square meal. He was more fatal to the king's English than O Dynamite Rosa. One day he was telling how methodical one of the county officials was. "Why," said he, "I never saw a man do so much and do it so easy. But the secret of it is plain enough, you see. He has a regular rotunda of business every day." If he meant anything, I suppose he meant a routine of business. But a man would have to be a mind reader to follow him some days when he had about 6 fingers of cough medicine aboard and began to paw around in the dark and musty garret of his memory for moth-eaten words that didn't mean anything. A neighbor of mine went to Washington during the Guteau trial and has been telling us about it ever since. He is one of those people who don't want to be close and stingy about what they know. He likes to go through life shedding information right and left. He likes to get a crowd around him and tell them how he was in Washington at the time of the post-mortis examination. "Boys, you may talk all you're a mind to, but the greatest thing I saw in Washington," said he, "was Dr. Mary Walker on the street every morning riding on one of these philosophers." He painted the top of his fence green last year, so it would kind of combinate with his blinds. If he would make his big words combinate with what he means a little better, he would not attract so much attention. But he don't care. He hates to see a big fat word loafing around with nothing to do, so he throws one in occasionally for exercise, I guess. In the Minnesota legislature in 1867, they had under discussion a bill to increase the per diem of members from $3 to $5. A member of the lower house who voted for the measure was hauled over the coals by one of his constituents and charged with corruption in no unmeasured terms. To all this the legislator calmly answered that when he got down to the Capitol and found out the awful price of bread, he concluded that his per diadem ought to be increased, and so he supported the measure. Then the belligerent constituent said, "I beg your pardon and acquit you of all charges of corruption. For a legislator who does not know the difference between a crown of glory and the price of a day's work is too big a blankety-blank fool to be convicted of an intentional wrong. End of section 86.
Section 87 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE. Section 87. Petticoats at the Polls. There have been many reasons given, first and last, why women should not vote. But I desire to say, in the full light of a ripe experience, that some of them are fallacious. I refer more particularly to the argument that it will degrade women to go to the polls and vote like a little man. While I am not, and have never been a howler for female suffrage, I must admit that it is much more of a success than prohibition and speculative science. My wife voted 8 years with my full knowledge and consent, and today I cannot see but that she is as docile and as tractable as when she won my trusting heart. Now, those who know me best will admit that I am not a ladies' man, and therefore what I may say here is not said to secure favor and grateful smiles. I am not attractive, and I am not in politics. I believe that I am homelier this winter than usual. There are reasons why I believe that what I may say on this subject will be sincere, and not sensational or selfish. It has been urged that good women do not generally exercise the right of suffrage when they have the opportunity, and that only those whose social record has been tarnished a good deal go to the polls. This is not true. It is the truth that a good full vote always shows a list of the best women and the wives of the best men. A bright day makes a better showing of lady voters than a bad one, and the weather makes a more perceptible difference in the female vote than the male. But when things are exciting, and the battle is red hot, and the tocsin of war sounds anon, the wife and mother puts on her armor and her sealskin sack, and knocks things cross-eyed. It is generally supposed that the female voter is a pantaloonadic, a half-horse, half-alligator kind of woman, who looks like Dr. Mary Walker, and has the appearance of one who has risen hastily in the night at the alarm of fire, and dressed herself partially in her own garments and partially in her husband's. This is a popular error. In Wyoming, where female suffrage has raged for years, you meet quiet, courteous, and gallant gentlemen, and fair, quiet, sensible women at the polls, where there isn't a loud or profane word, and where it is an infinitely more proper place to send a young lady unescorted than to the post office in any city in the Union. You can readily see why this is so. The men about the polls are always candidates and their friends. That is the reason that neither party can afford to show the slightest rudeness toward a voter. The man who on Wednesday would tell her to go and soak her head, perhaps, would stand bareheaded to let her pass on Tuesday. While she holds a smashed ballot shoved under the palm of her gray kid glove, she may walk over the candidate's prostrate form with impunity and her overshoes if she chooses to. Weeks and months before election in Wyoming, the party with the longest purse subsidizes the most livery stables and carriages. Then, on the eventful day, every conveyance available is decorated with a political placard and driven by a polite young man who is instructed to improve the time. Thus, every woman in Wyoming has a chance to ride once a year at least. Lately, however, many prefer to walk to the polls, and they go in pairs, trios, and quartets, voting their little sentiments and calmly returning to their cookies and crazy quilts as though politics didn't jar their mental poise a minute. It is possible, and even probable, that a man and his wife may disagree on politics as they might on religion. The husband may believe in Andrew Jackson and a relentless hell, while his wife may be a stalwart and rather liberal on the question of eternal punishment. If the husband manages his wife as he would a clothes wringer, and turns her through life by a crank, he will, no doubt, work her politically. But if she has her own ideas about things, she will naturally act upon them, while the man who is henpecked in other matters till he can't see out of his eyes will be henpecked, no doubt, in the matter of national and local politics. These are a few facts about the actual workings of female suffrage, and I do not tackle the great question of the ultimate results upon the political machinery if woman suffrage were to become general. I do not pretend to say as to that. I know a great deal, but I do not know that. There are millions of women, no doubt, who are better qualified to vote, and yet cannot, than millions of alleged men who do vote, but no one can tell now what the ultimate effect of a change might be. So far as Wyoming is concerned, the territory is prosperous and happy. I see also that a murderer was hung by process of law there the other day. That looks like the onward march of reform, whether female suffrage had anything to do with it or not. And they're going to hang another in March if the weather is favorable, and executive clemency remains dormant, as I think it will. All these things look hopeful. We can't tell what the territory would have been without female suffrage, but when they begin to hang men by law instead of by moonlight, the future begins to brighten up. When you have to get up in the night to hang a man every little while and don't get any per diem for it, you feel as though you were a good way from home. The Sedentary Hen. Though generally cheerful and content with her lot, the hen at times becomes moody, sullen, and taciturn. We are often called upon to notice and profit by the genial and sunny disposition of the hen, and yet there are times in her life when she is morose, cynical, and the prey of consuming melancholy. At such times not only her own companions, but man himself shuns the hen. At first she seems to be preoccupied only. She starts and turns pale when suddenly spoken to. Then she leaves her companions and seems to be the victim of hypochondria. Then her mind wanders. At last you come upon her suddenly some day, seated under the currant bushes. You sympathize with her, and you seek to fondle her. She then picks a small memento out of the back of your hand. You then gently but firmly coax her out of there with a hoe, and you find that she has been seated for some time on an old croquet ball, trying to hatch out a whole set of croquet balls. This shows that her mind is affected. You pick up the croquet ball and find it hot and feverish, so you throw it into the shade of the woodshed. Anon, you find your demented hen in the loft of the barn, hovering over a doorknob and trying by patience and industry to hatch out a hotel. When a hen imagines that she is inspired to incubate, she at once ceases to be an ornament to society and becomes a crank. She violates all the laws and customs of nature and society in trying to hatch a conservatory by setting through the long days and nights of summer on a small flower pot. Man may win the affections of the tiger, the lion, or the huge elephant, and make them subservient to his wishes, but the setting hen is not susceptible to affection. You might as well love the Manitoba blizzard, or try to quell the cyclone by looking calmly in its eye. The setting hen is filled with hatred for every living thing. She loves to brood over her wrongs or anything else she can find to squat on. I once owned a hen that made a specialty of setting. She never ceased to be the proud, anonymous author of a new, warm egg, but she yearned to be a parent. She therefore seated herself on a nest where other hens were in the habit of leaving their handiwork for inspection. She remained there during the summer hatching steadily on while the others laid, until she filled my barnyard with little orphaned henlets of different ages. She remained there day and night, patiently turning out poultry for me to be a father to. I brought up on the bottle about 100 that summer that had been turned out by this morbidly maternal hen. All she seemed to ask in return was my kind regards and esteem. I fed her upon the nest and humored her in every way. Every day she became a parent, and every day added to my responsibility. One day I noticed that she seemed weak, and there was a far-away look in her eye. For the first time the horrible truth burst upon my mind. I buried my face in the hay-mow, and I am not ashamed to say that I wept. Strong man as I am not too proud to say that I soaked that hay-mow through with unavailing tears. My hen was dying even then. Her breath came hot and quick like the swift rush of a hot ball that caves in the shortstop and speeds away to center field. The next morning 100 chickens of various sizes were motherless, and if anything had happened to me, they would have been fatherless. For many years I have made a close study of the setting hen, but I am still unsettled as to what is best to do with her. She is a freak of nature, a disagreeable anomaly, a fussy phenomenon. Logic, rhetoric, and metaphor are all alike to the setting hen. You might as well go down into the bosom of Vesuvius and ask it to postpone the next eruption. End of section 87.
Section 88 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE, Section 88. A Bright Future for Pugilism. The recent prominence of Mr. John E. Dempsey, better known as Jack Dempsey of New York, brings to mind a 4 days trip taken in his company from Portland, Oregon, to St. Paul over the northern Pacific. There were 3 pugilists in the party besides myself, viz. Dempsey, Dave Campbell, and Tom Cleary. We made a grand triumphant tour across the country together, and I may truthfully state that I never felt so free to say anything I wanted to other passengers as I did at that time. I wish I could afford to take at least one pugilist with me all the time. In traveling about the country lecturing, a good pugilist would be of great assistance. I would like to set him on the man who always asks, "Where do you go to from here, Mr. Nye?" He does not ask because he wants to know, for the next moment he asks right over again. I do not know why he asks, but surely it is not for the purpose of finding out. Well, throughout our long journey across the state of Oregon and the territories of Idaho, Montana, and Dakota, and the state of Minnesota, it was one continual ovation. Dempsey had a worldwide reputation, I found, co-extensive with the horizon, as I may say, and bounded only by the zodiac. In my great forthcoming work, entitled Half Hours with Great Men, or Eminent People Which I Have Saw, I shall give a fuller description of this journey. The book will be a great boon. Mr. Dempsey is not a man who would be picked out as a great man. You might pass by him 2 or 3 times without recognizing his eminence, and yet, at a scrapping matinee or swatting recital, he seems to hold his audiences at his own sweet will, also his antagonist. Mr. Dempsey does not crave notoriety. He seems rather to court seclusion. This is characteristic of the man. See how he walked around all over the state of New York last week, in the night too, in order to evade the crowd. His logic, however, is wonderful. Though quiet and unassuming in his manner, his arguments are powerful and generally make a large protuberance wherever they alight. Nothing is more pleasing than the sight of a man who has risen by his own unaided effort, fought his way up as it were, and yet who is not vain. Mr. Dempsey conversed with me frequently during our journey and did not seem to feel above me. I opened the conversation by telling him that I had seen a number of his works. Nothing pleases a young author so much as a little friendly remark in relation to his work. I had seen a study of his one day in New York last spring. It was an italic nose with quotation marks on each side. It was a very happy little bon mot on Mr. Dempsey's part, and attracted a good deal of notice at the time. Mr. Dempsey is not a college graduate, as many suppose. He is a self-made man. This should be a great encouragement to our boys who are now unknown, and whose portraits have not as yet appeared in the sporting papers. But Mr. Dempsey's great force as a debater is less perhaps in the matter than in the manner. His delivery is good, and his gestures cannot fail to convince the most skeptical. Striking in appearance, aggressive in his nature, and happy in his gestures, he is certain to attract the attention of the police, and he cannot fail to rivet the eye of his adversary. I saw one of his adversaries not long ago, whose eye had been successfully riveted in that way. And yet John E. Dempsey was once a poor boy. He had none of the advantages which wealth and position bring, but, confident of his latent ability as a middle-weight convincer, he toiled on, ever on, sitting up until long after other people had gone to bed, patiently knocking out those who might be brought to him for that purpose. He never hung back because the way looked long and lonely. And what is the result? Today, in the full vigor of manhood, he is sought out and petted by everyone who takes an interest in the onward march of pugilism. It is a wonderful record, though brief. It shows what patient industry will accomplish unaided. Had John E. Dempsey hesitated to enter the ring and said that he would rather go to school, where he would be safe, he might today be an educated man. But what does that amount to here in America, where everybody can have an education? He would have lost his talent as a slugger, and drifted steadily downward, perhaps, till he became a schoolteacher or a narrow-chested editor, writing things day after day just to gratify the morbid curiosity of a sin-cursed world. In closing, I would like to say that I hope I have not expressed an opinion in the above that may hereafter be used against me. Do not understand me to be the foe of education. Education and refinement are good enough in their places, but how shall we attract attention by trying to become refined and educated in a land where, as I say, education and refinement seem almost to run rampant? Heretofore, in America, pugilism has been made subservient to the common schools. Pugilism and polygamy have both been crowded to the wall. Now, pugilism is about to assert itself. The tin ear and the gory nose will soon come to the front, and the day is not far distant when progressive pugilism and the prize ring will take the place of the poorly ventilated common school and the enervating prayer meeting. The Snake Indian. There are about 5,000 Snake or Shoshone Indians now extant, the greater part being in Utah and Nevada, though there is a reservation in Idaho and another in Wyoming. The Shoshone Indian is reluctant to accept of civilization on the European plan. He prefers the ruder customs, which have been handed down from father to son along with other heirlooms. I use the word heirlooms in its broadest sense. There are the Shoshones proper and the Utes or Utahs, to which have been added by some authorities the Comanches and Moquis of New Mexico and Arizona, the Natellas and other tribes of California. The Shoshone, wherever found, is clothed in buckskin and blanket in winter, but dressed more lightly in summer, wearing nothing but an air of intense gloom in August. To this he adds on holidays a necklace made from the store teeth of the hardy pioneer. The Snake or Shoshone Indian is passionately fond of the game known as poker among us, and which, I learn, is played with cards. It is a game of chance, though skill and a thorough knowledge of firearms are of great use. The Indians enter into this game with great zeal, and lend to it the wonderful energy which they have preserved from year to year by abstaining from the debilitating effects of manual labor. All day long the red warrior sits in his skin boudoir, nursing the sickly and reluctant flush patient, silent and hopeful. Through the cold of winter, in the desolate mountains, he continues to hope on, hope ever, that he will draw to fill. Far away up the canyon he hears the sturdy blows of his wife's tomahawk as she slaughters the greasewood and the sagebrush for the fire in his gilded hell where he sits and woos the lazy goddess of fortune. With the Shoshone, poker is not alone a relaxation, the game wherewith to wear out a long and listless evening, but it is a passion, a duty, and a devotion. He has a face designed especially for poker. It never shows a sign of good or evil fortune. You might as well try to win a smile from a railroad right-of-way. The full hand, the fours, threes, pairs, and bobtail flushes are all the same to him, if you judge by his face. When he gets hungry, he cinches himself a little tighter and continues to wrestle with fate. You look at his smoky old copper cent of a face, and you see no change. You watch him as he coins the last buckshot of his tribe, and later on, when he goes forth a pauper, and the corners of his famine-breeding mouth have never moved. His little black, smoke-inflamed eyes have never lighted with triumph or joy. He is the great aboriginal stoic and sylvan dude. He does not smile. He does not weep. It certainly must be intensely pleasant to be a wild, free, lawless, irresponsible, natural-born fool. The Shoshones proper include the Bannocks, which are again subdivided into the Coolsitakara, or buffalo eaters, on Wind River, the Tukarika, or mountain sheep eaters, on Salmon or Suabe Ivers, the Shoshokas, or white knives, sometimes called diggers, of the Humboldt Ivor and the Great Salt Lake Basin. Probably the hokandikas, yahoo-skins, and wallpapes are subdivisions of the digger tribe. I am not sure of this, but I shall not suspend my business till I can find out about it. If I cannot get at a great truth right off, I wait patiently and go right on drawing my salary. The Shoshones live on the government and other small game. They will eat anything when hungry, from a buffalo down to a wood-tick. The Shoshone does not despise small things. He loves insects in any form. He loves to make pets of them and to study their habits in his home life. Formerly, when a great Shoshone warrior died, they killed his favorite wife over his grave, so that she could go to the happy hunting grounds with him, but it is not so customary now. I tried to impress on an old Shoshone brave once that they ought not to do that. I tried to show him that it would encourage celibacy and destroy domestic ties in his tribe. Since then there has been quite a stride toward reform among them. Instead of killing the widow on the death of the husband takes such good care of his health and avoids all kinds of intellectual strain or physical fatigue that late years there are no widows, but widowers just seem to swarm in the Shoshone tribe. The woods are full of them. Now, if they would only kill the widower over the grave of the wife, the Indian's future would assume a more definite shape. End of section 88. Recording by Linda Johnson. Section 89 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE, Section 89. Roller skating. I have once more tried to ride a pair of roller skates. That is the reason I got down on the rink and down on roller skates. That is the reason several people got down on me. That is also the reason why I now state in a public manner, to a lost and undone race, that unless the roller rink is at once abolished, the whole civilized race will at once be plunged into arnica. I had tried it once before, but had not carried my experiments to a successful termination. I made a trip around the rink last August, but was ruled out by the judges for incompetency and advised to skate among the people who were hostile to the government of the United States, while the proprietors repaired the rink. On the 9th of June, I nestled in the bosom of a cyclone to excess, and it has required the bulk of the succeeding months for nature to glue the bone of my leg together in proper shape. That is the reason I have not given the attention to roller skating that I should. A few weeks ago I read what Mr. Talmage said about the great national vice. It was his opinion that if we skated in a proper spirit, we could leave the rink each evening with our immortal souls in good shape. Somehow it got out that on Thursday evening I would undertake the feat of skating 3 rounds in 3 hours with no protection to my scruples for 1/2 the gate money, Talmage rules. So there was quite a large audience present with opera glasses. Some had umbrellas, especially on the front rows. These were worn spread in order to ward off fragments of the rink which might become disengaged and set in motion by atmospheric disturbances. In obedience to a wild Wagnerian snort from the orchestra, I came into the arena with my skates in hand. I feel perfectly at home before an audience when I have my skates in hand. It is a morbid desire to wear the skates on my feet that has always been my bête noire. Will the office boy please give me a brass check for that word so that I can get it when I go away? My first thought, after getting myself secured to the skates, was this: am I in the proper frame of mind? Am I doing this in the right spirit? Am I about to skate in such a way as to lift the fog of unbelief which now envelops a sinful world, or shall I deepen the opaque night in which my race is wrapped? Just then, that end of the rink erupted in a manner so forthwith and so tout ensemble that I had to push it back in place with my person. I never saw anything done with less delay or less languor. The audience went wild with enthusiasm, and I responded to the encore by writing my name in the air with my skates. This closed the first séance, and my trainer took me in the dressing room to attend a consultation of physicians. After the rink carpenter had jacked up the floor a little, I went out again. I had no fears about my ability to perform the mechanical part assigned me, but I was still worried over the question of whether it would or would not be of lasting benefit to mankind. Those who have closely scrutinized my frame in repose have admitted that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Students of the human frame say that they never saw such a wealth of looseness and limberness lavished upon one person. They claim that nature bestowed upon me the hinges and joints intended for a whole family, and therefore, when I skate, the air seems to be perfectly lurid with limbs. I presume that this is true, though I have so little leisure while skating in which to observe the method itself, the plot or animus of the thing, as it were, that my opinion would be of little value to the scientist. I am led to believe that the roller skate is certainly a great civilizer and wonderful leveler of mankind. If we so skate that when the summons comes to seek our ward in the general hospital, where each shall heal his busted cuticle within the walls where rinkists squirm, we go not like the moral wreck, morally paralyzed, but like a hired man taking his medicine, and so forth. We may skate with perfect impunity, or anyone else to whom we may be properly introduced by our cook. No more frontier. The system of building railroads into the wilderness, and then allowing the wilderness to develop afterward, has knocked the essential joy out of the life of the pioneer. At one time, the hardy hewer of wood and drawer of water gave his lifetime willingly, that his son might ride in the varnished cars. Now the Pullman Palace car takes the New Yorker to the threshold of the sea, or to the boundary line between the United States and the British possessions. It has driven out the long-handled frying pan and the flapjack of 20 years ago, and introduced the condensed milk and canned fruit of commerce. Along the highways, where once the hopeful hundreds marched with long-handled shovel and pick and pan, cooking by the way thin salt pork and flapjacks and slumgullion, now the road is lined with empty beer bottles and peach cans that have outlived their usefulness. No landscape can be picturesque with an empty peach can in the foreground any more than a lion would look grand in a red monogram horse blanket and false teeth. The modern camp is not the camp of the wilderness. It wears the half-civilized and shabby genteel garments of a sawed-off town. You know that if you ride a day, you will be where you can get the daily papers and read them under the electric light. That robs the old canyons of their solemn isolation and peoples each gulch with the odor of codfish balls and civilization. Civilization is not to blame for all this, and yet it seems sad. Civilization could not have done all this alone. It had to call to its aid the infernal fruit can that now desolates the most obscure trail in the heart of the mountains. You walk over chaos where the hydraulic has plowed up the valley like a convulsion, or you tread the yielding path across the deserted dump, and on all sides the rusty, neglected, and humiliated empty tin can stares at you with its monotonous, dude-like stare. An old-timer said to me once, "I've about decided, Bill, that the West is a matter of history. When we cooked our grub over a sage brush fire, we could get fat and fight Indians, but now we fill our digesters with the cold pizen and pewter of the canned peach. We go to a big tavern and stick a towel under our chins and eat pie with a fork and heat up our carcasses with Antichrist coal. And what do we amount to? Nothing. I used to chase Injuns all day and eat raw salt pork at night, Because I dasn't build a fire, and still I felt better than I do now with a wad of tin can solder in my stomach and a homesick feeling in my weather-beaten breast. No, we don't have the fun we used to. We have more soirees and sciatica and one bloomin' thing and another of that kind, but we don't get one snort of pure air and appetite in a year. They're bringing in their blamed telephones now, and malaria and ague and old sledge, and fun might as well skip out. There ain't no frontier any more. All we've got left is the old-fashioned Trantler Jews and rheumatiz of '49. Behind the red squaw's cayuse plug, the handcar roars and raves, and pie-plant pies are now produced above the Indian graves. I hear the oaths of pioneers, the caucus yet to be, the first low hum where soon will be the fuzzy bumblebee. End of section 89. Recording by Linda Johnson.
Section 90 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by S.K., Edison, New Jersey. Remarks by Bill NYE. Section 90. A Letter of Regrets. My dear Princess Beatrice, I received your kind invitation to come up to Whippingham on the 23rd instant and see you married, but I have not been able to get there. The weather has been so hot this month that, to tell you the truth, Beatrice, I haven't been going anywhere to speak of. At first, I thought I would go anyhow, and even went so far as to pick out a nice corner bracket to take along for a wedding present. Not so much for its intrinsic value, of course, but so you would have something with my name to it on a card that you could show to those English dudes and let them know that you had influential friends even in America. But when I thought what a long, hard trip it would be, and how I would probably mash that bracket on the cars before I got halfway there, I gave it up. I am not personally acquainted with your inamorato, if that's all right, never having met him in our set. But I understand you have done well, and that your husband is a rising young man of good family, and that he will never allow you to put your hands into dishwater. I hope this is true, and that he does not drink. Rum has certainly paralyzed more dukes in such things than war has. I attribute this to the fact that princes and dukes are generally more reckless about exposing themselves to the demon rum than to the rude alarums and one thing another of war. If you keep a girl, I hope you will get a good one who knows her business. A green girl in the house of a newly married princess is a great source of annoyance. A friend of mine who got married last winter got a girl whose mind had been eaten by cutworms, and she had not discovered it. All the faculty that had been spared her was that power of the mind which enabled her to charge $3 a week. She lubricated the buckwheat pancake griddle for a week with soap grease and a dash of castor oil, and when she was discharged, she wept bitterly because capital with the iron heel ground the poor servant girl into the dust. Probably you will take a little tour after the wedding is over. They are doing that way a good deal in Boston this season. I thought you would like a pointer in the very lumtumest thing to do, and so I write this. So long as you have the means to do this thing right, I think you ought to do so. You may never be married again, Princess, and now is the time to paint the British Isles red. You can also get more concessions from your husband now, while he is a little rattled and temporarily knocked silly by the pomp and pageant of marrying into your family. And if you work it right, you can maintain this supremacy for years. Treat him with a gentle firmness, and do not weep on his bosom if you detect the aroma of beer and bologna sausage on his young breath. Bologna and royalty do not seem to harmonize first rate, but remember, you can harass your husband if you choose, so that he will fall to even lower depths than Bologna and Milwaukee beer. Do not aggravate him when he comes home tired, but help him do the chores and greet him with a smile. I'd just as soon tell you, Beatrice, that this smile racket is not original with me. I read it in a paper. This paper went on to say that a young wife should always greet her husband with a smile on his return. I showed the article to my wife and suggested that it was a good scheme and hoped she would try it on me sometime. She said if I would like to change off a while and take my smile when I got home instead of taking it downtown, we would make the experiment. The trouble with the average woman of the age in which we live, Beatrice, is that she is above her business. She tries to be superior to her husband, and in many instances she succeeds. That is the bane of wedded life. Do not strive to be superior to your husband, Beatrice. If you do, it is goodbye, John. Treat him well at all times, whether he treats you well or not. Then, when your mother gets tired of raining and wants to come down and spend the hot weather with you, she will be kindly greeted by her son-in-law. Do not allow the fact that you belong to the royal family to interfere with your fun, Beatrice. If you want to wear a Mother Hubbard dress on the throne during hot weather, or mash a mosquito with your mother's scepter, do so. Conventionality is a humbug and a nuisance. And I'd just as soon tell you right here that if I could have gone to your wedding and worn a linen coat and a perspiration, I would have gone. But to stand around there all day in a tight black suit of clothes, in a mixed crowd of dukes and counts and princes of high degree, most of whom are total strangers to me, is more than I can stand. I wish you would give my love to your mother and tell her just how it was. Make it as smooth as you can and break it to her gently. Tell her that the royal family is spreading out so that I can't leave my work every time one of its members gets married. Remember me to the Waleses, the Darmstadts, Princess Irene and Victoria, Mr. and Mrs. Prince Alexander of Bulgaria, and also Prince Francis of Battenberg and the Countess Erbach-Schomberg. They will all be there probably, and so will Lord Latham and Lord Edgcumbe. I know just how Edgcumbe will snort around there when he finds that I can't be there. Give my kind regards to any other lords, dukes, duchesses, dowagers, or marchionesses who may inquire for me, and tell them all that I will be in London next year if the Prince of Wales will drop me a line stating that the moral tone of the city is such that it would be safe for me to come. End of a letter of regrets. Venice. We arrived in Venice last evening, latitude 45 degrees 25 minutes north, longitude 12 degrees 19 minutes east. Venice is the home of the Venetian, and also where the gondola has its nest and rears its young. It is also the headquarters for the paint known as Venetian red. They use it in painting the town on festive occasions. This is the town where the merchant of Venice used to do business, and the home of Shylock, a broker who shared the Venetian lamp at the corner of the Rialto and the Grand Canal. He is now no more. I couldn't even find an old neighbor near the Rialto who remembered Shylock. From what I can learn of him, however, I am led to believe that he was pretty close in his deals, and liked to catch a man in a tight place and then make him squirm. Shylock, during the Great Panic in Venice many years ago, it is said, had a chattel mortgage on more lives than you could shake a stick at. He would loan a small amount to a merchant at 3% a month and secure it on a pound of the merchant's liver, or by a cutthroat mortgage on his respiratory apparatus. Then, when the paper matured, he would go up to the house with a pair of scales and a pie knife and demand a foreclosure. Venice is one of the best watered towns in Europe. You can hardly walk a block without getting your feet wet unless you ride in a gondola. The gondola is a long, slim hack without wheels and is worked around through the damp streets by a brunette man whose breath should be a sad framing to us all. He is called the gondolier. Sometimes he sings in a low tone of voice and in a foreign tongue. I do not know where I have met so many foreigners as I have here in Europe, unless it was in New York at the polls. Wherever I go, I hear a foreign tongue. I do not know whether these people talk in the Italian language just to show off or not. Perhaps they prefer it. London is the only place I have visited where the Boston dialect is used. London was originally settled by adventurers from Boston. The blood of some of the royal families of Massachusetts may be found in the veins of London people. Wealthy young ladies in Venice do not run away with the coachman. There are no coaches, no coachmen, and no horses in Venice. There are only 4 houses in Venice, and they are made of copper and exhibited at St. Mark's as curiosities. The Accademia del Belle Arti of Venice is a large picture store where I went yesterday to buy a few pictures for Christmas presents. A painting by Titian, the Italian Prang, pleased me very much, but I couldn't beat down the price to where it would be any object for me to buy it. Besides, it would be a nuisance to carry such a picture around with me all over the Alps, up the Rhine, and through St. Lawrence County. I finally decided to leave it and secure something less awkward to carry and pay for. The Italians are quite proud of their smoky old paintings. I've often thought that if Venice would run less to art and more to soap, she would be more apt to win my respect. Art is all right to a certain extent, but it can be run in the ground. It breaks my heart to know how lavish nature has been with water here, and yet how the Venetians scorn to investigate its benefits. When a gondolier gets a drop of water on him, he swoons. Then he lies in a kind of coma till another gondolier comes along to breathe in his face and revive him. End of Venice. End of section 90.
Section 91 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE. Section 91. She kind of coaxed him. I never practiced law very much, but during the brief period that my sheet iron sign was kissed by the Washoe Zephyr, I had several odd experiences. I'm sure that lawyers who practice for 40 years, especially on the frontier or in new country, could write a large book that would make mighty interesting reading. One day I was figuring up how much a man could save in 10 years, paying $40 a month in rent and taking in $2.50 per month, when a large man with a sad eye and an early purple tumor on the side of his head came in and asked me if my name was Nye. I told him it was, and I asked him to take a chair and spit on the stove a few times and make himself entirely at home. He did so. After answering in a loud, tremulous tone of voice that we were having rather a backward spring, he produced a red cotton handkerchief and took out of it a deed, which he submitted to my ripe and logical legal mind. I asked him if that was his name that appeared in the body of the deed as grantor. He said it was. I then asked him why his wife had not signed it, as it seemed to be the homestead, and her name appeared in the instrument with that of her husband, but her signature wasn't at the foot, though his name was duly signed, witnessed, and acknowledged. "Well," said he, "there's where the gazelle comes in." He then took a bite off the corner of a plug of tobacco about as big as a railroad land grant, and laid 2 $20 gold pieces on the desk near my arm. I took them and tapped them together like the cashier of the Bank of England, and, disguising my annoyance over the little episode, told him to go on. "Well," said the large man, fondling the wen which nestled lovingly in his faded Titian hair, "my wife has conscientious scruples against signing that deed. We have been married about a year now, but not actively for the past 11 months. I'm kind of ex officio husband, as you might say. After we'd been married about a month, a little incident occurred which made a riffle, as you might say, in our domestic tide. I was division master on the UP, and one night I got an order to go down towards Sydney and look at a bridge. Of course I couldn't get back till the next evening, so I sighed and switched off to the superintendent's office, expecting to go over on number 4 and look at the bridge. At the office, They told me that I needn't go till Tuesday. So I strolled uptown and got home about 9 o'clock. Went in with a latchkey just as a mutual friend went out through the bedroom window, taking a sash that I paid $2 for. I didn't care for the sash because he left a pair of pantaloons worth $12 and some silver in the pockets. But I thought it was such odd taste for a man to wear a sash without his uniform. Well, as I had documentary evidence against my wife, I told her she could take a vacation. She cried a good deal, but it didn't count. I suffered a good deal, but tears did not avail. It takes a good deal of damp weather to float me out of my regular channel. She spent the night packing her trousseau, and in the morning she went away. Now, I could get a divorce and save all this trouble of getting her signature, but I'd rather not tell this whole business in court, for the little woman seems to be trying to do better, and if it wasn't for her blamed old hyena of a mother, we'd get along tip-top. She's living with her mother now, and if a lawyer would go to the girl and tell her how it is, and that I want to sell the property and want her signature in place of getting a divorce, I believe she'd sign. Would you mind trying it? I said if I could get time, I would go over and talk with her and see what she said. So I did. I got along pretty well, too. I found the young woman at home and told her the legal aspects of the case. She wouldn't admit any of the charges, but after a long parley agreed to execute the deed and save trouble. She came to my office an hour later and signed the instrument. I got 2 witnesses to the signature and had just put the notarial seal on it when the girl's mother came in. She asked her daughter if she had signed the deed and was told that she had. She said nothing, but smiled in a way that made my blood run cold. If a woman were to smile on me that way every day, I should certainly commit some great crime. I was just congratulating myself on the success of the business and was looking at the 2 $20 gold pieces and trying to get acquainted with them, as it were, after the 2 women had gone away. When they returned, with the husband and the son-in-law at the head of the procession, he looked pale and careworn to me. He asked me in a low voice if I had a deed there executed by his wife. I said yes. He then asked me if I would kindly destroy it. I said I would. I would make deeds and tear them up all day at $40 apiece. I said I liked the conveyancing business very much, and if a client felt like having a grand warranty deed debauch, I was there to furnish the raw material. I then tore up the deed, and the 2 women went quietly away. After they had gone, my client, in an absent-minded way, took out a large quid that had outlived its usefulness, lay it tenderly on the open page of Estes' pleadings, and said, "You doubtless think I am a singular organization, and that my ways are past finding out. I wish to ask you if I did right a moment ago." Here he took out another $20 and put it under the paperweight. "When I went downstairs, I met my mother-in-law. She always looked to me like a firm woman, but I did not think she was so unswerving as she really was. She asked me in a low, musical voice to please destroy the deed, and then she took one of them Smith & Wesson automatic advance agents of death out from under her apron, and kind of wheedled me into saying I would. Now, did I do right? I want a candid legal opinion, and I'm ready to pay for it." I said he did perfectly right. Answering an invitation. Hudson, Wisconsin, January 19th, 1886. Dear friend, I have just received your kind and cordial invitation to come to Washington and spend several weeks there among the eminent men of our proud land. I would be glad to go as you suggest, but I cannot do so at this time. I am passionately fond of mingling with the giddy whirl of good society. I hope you will not feel that my reason for declining your kind invitation is that I feel myself above good society. I assure you I do not. Nothing pleases me better than to dress up and mingle among my fellow men, with a sprinkling here and there of the other sex. It is true that the most profitable study for mankind is man, but we should not overlook woman. Woman is now seeking to be emancipated. Let us put our great, strong arms around her and emancipate her. Even if we cannot emancipate but one, we shall not have lived entirely for naught. I am told by those upon whom I can rely that there are hundreds of attractive young women throughout our joyous land who have arrived at years of discretion and yet who have never been emancipated. I met a woman on the cars last week who was lecturing on this subject, and she told me all about it. Now the question at once presents itself: how shall we emancipate woman unless we go where she is? We must go right into society and take her by the hand and never let go of her hand till she is properly emancipated. Not only must she be emancipated, but she must be emancipated from her present thraldom. Thraldom of this kind is liable to break out in any community, and those who are now in perfect health may pine away in a short time and flicker. My course, while mingling in society's mad whirl, is to first open the conversation with a young lady by leading her away to the conservatory, where I ask her if she has ever been the victim of thraldom, and whether or not she has ever been ground under the heel of the tyrant man. I then time her pulse for 30 minutes so as to strike a good average. The emancipation of woman is destined at some day to become one of our leading industries. You also ask me to kindly lead the German while there. I would cheerfully do so, but owing to the wobbly eccentricity of my cyclone leg, it would be sort of a broken German. But I could sit nearby and watch the game with a furtive glance, and fan the young ladies between the acts, and converse with them in low, earnest, passionate tones. I like to converse with people in whom I take an interest. I was conversing with a young lady one evening in a recherché ball in my faraway home in the free and unfettered West, a very brilliant affair, I remember, under the auspices of Hose Company No. 2. I was talking in a loud and earnest way to this liquid-eyed creature, a little louder than usual, because the music was rather forte just then, and the bass viola virtuoso was bearing on rather hard at the moment. The music ceased with a sudden snort, and so did my wife, who was just waltzing past us. If I had ceased to converse at the same time that the music shut off, all might have been well, but I did not. Your remark that the President and Cabinet would be glad to see me this winter is ill-timed. There have been times when it would have given me much pleasure to visit Washington, but I did not vote for Mr. Cleveland, to tell the truth, and I know that if I were to go to the White House and visit even for a few days, he would reproach me and throw it up to me. It is true I did not pledge myself to vote for him, but still I would hate to go to a man's house and eat his popcorn and use his smoking tobacco after I voted against him, and talked about him as I have about Cleveland. No, I can't be a hypocrite. I am right out, open and above board. If I talk about a man behind his back, I won't go and gorge myself with his victuals. I was assured by parties in whom I felt perfect confidence that Mr. Cleveland was a moral leper, and replying on such assurances from men in whom I felt that I could trust, and not being at that time where I could ask Mr. Cleveland in person whether he was or was not a moral leper as aforesaid, I assisted in spreading the report that he had been exposed to moral leprosy, and as near as I could learn, he was liable to come down with it at any time. So that even if I go to Washington, I shall put up at a hotel and pay my bills just as any other American citizen would. I know how it is with Mr. Cleveland at this time. When the legislature is in session there, people come in from around Buffalo with their butter and eggs to sell, and stay overnight with the president. But they should not ride a free horse to death. I may not be well educated, but I am high-strung till you can't rest. Groceries are just as high in Washington as they are in Philadelphia. I hope that you will not glean from the foregoing that I have lost my interest in national affairs. God forbid. Though not in the political arena myself, my sympathies are with those who are. I am willing to assist the families of those who are in the political arena, trying to obtain a precarious livelihood thereby. I was once an official under the federal government myself. As the curious student of national affairs may learn, if he will go to the Treasury Department at Washington, D.C., and ask to see my voucher for $9.85, covering salary as United States Commissioner for the 2nd Judicial District of Wyoming for the year 1882. It was at that time that a vile contemporary characterized me as a corrupt and venal federal official who had fattened upon the hard-wrung taxes of my fellow citizens and gorged myself for years at the public crib. This was unjust. I was not corrupt. I was not venal. I was only hungry. End of section 91. Section 92 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE. Section 92. Streetcars and Curiosities. There is an institution in Boston which the Pilgrim Fathers did not originate. That is the streetcar. There is a streetcar parade all day on Washington Street and a red light procession most of the night. People told me that I can get into a car and go anywhere I wanted to. I tried it. There was a point in Boston, I learned, where there were some more relics that I hadn't seen. Parties told me where I could find some more fragments of the Mayflower, and an old chair in which Josiah Quincy had sat down to think. There were also a few more low-priced flintlock guns and tomahawks that no man who visited Boston could afford to miss. Besides, there was said to be the lock that used to be on the door of a room in which General Washington had a good notion to write his farewell address. All these things were in the collection which I started out to find, and there were others also. For instance, there was a specimen of the lightning that Franklin caught in his demijohn out of the sky, and still in a good state of preservation. Also, some more clothes in which he was baptized. More swords of Bunker Hill, and a little shirt which John Hancock put on as soon as he was born. Hancock was a perfect gentleman from his birth, and it is said that the first thing he did was to excuse himself for a moment and then put on this shirt. His manners were certainly very agreeable, and he was very much polished. I heard, too, that there was an acorn from the tree in which Benedict Arnold had his nest while he was hatching treason. I did not believe it, but I had an idea I could readily discover the fraud if I can only see the acorn, for I am a great historian and researcher from away back. I was told that in this collection there was a suspender button shed by Patrick Henry during his memorable speech in which he raised up to his full height on his hind feet and permitted the war to come in italics, also in small caps and in large caps with 3 astonishers on the end. So I wanted to find this place, and as I had plenty of means, I decided to ride in a streetcar. Therefore, I aimed my panic-price cane at the driver of a cream-colored car with a blue stomach and remarked, "Hi there." Before I go any further, and in order to avoid ambiguity, let me say that it was the car that had the blue stomach. He, the driver, twisted the brake, and I went inside, clear to the farther end, and sat down by the side of a young woman who filled the whole car with sunshine. I was so happy that I gave the conductor $50 and told him to keep the change. If by chance she sees this, I hope she still remembers me. Pretty soon a very fat woman came into the car and aimed for our quarter. She evidently intended to squat between this fair girl and myself. But I thought to myself in a low tone of voice, I will fool thee. So I shoved my person along in the seat toward the sweet girl of the Bay State. The corpulent party, whose name I did not learn, had in the meantime backed up to where she had detected a slight vacancy, and where I had seen fit to place myself. At that moment she heaved a sigh of relief, and assisted by the motion of the car, which just then turned a corner, she sat down in my lap, and nestled in my bosom like a tired baby elephant. Dear reader, if I were to tell you that the crystal of my watch was picked out from under my shoulder blades the next day, you would not believe it, would you? I will not strain your faith in me by making the statement, but that was the heaviest woman I ever held. While all this was going on, I lost track of my location. The car began to squirm all over Boston, and finally the conductor came back and wanted more money. I said no. I would get off and try a dark red car with a green stomach for a while. So I did. I rode on that till I had seen a great deal of new scenery, and then I asked the conductor if he passed number clankety-clank blank street. He said he did not, but if I would go down 2 blocks further and take a maroon car with a plaid stomach, it would take me to the corner of what-do-you-call-it and what's-his-name streets, where, if I took a seal brown car with squished huckleberry trimmings, it would take me to where I wanted to go. So I tried it. I do not know just where I missed my train, but when I found the seal brown car with the scrunched huckleberry trimmings, it was going the other way, and it was late. So I went into a cafe and refreshed myself. When I came out, I discovered that it was too late to see the collection, even if I could find it, for at 6 o'clock they take the relics in and put them into a refrigerator till morning. I was now weary and somewhat disappointed, so I desired to get back to my headquarters, wherein I could rest, and where I could lock myself up in my room so no prize fat woman could enter. I hailed one of those sawed-off landaus consisting of 2 wheels, 1 door behind, and a bill for 2 bits. I told the college graduate on the box where I wanted to go, gave him a quarter, and got in. I sat down and heaved a chaste sigh. The sigh was only half hove when the herdic backed up to my destination, which was about 300 feet from where I got in, as the crow flies. When I go to Boston again, I'm going in charge of the police. The street railway system of Boston is remarkably perfect. 50 cars pass a given point on Washington Street in an hour, and yet there are no blockades. You can take one of those cars if you are a stranger, and you can get so mixed up that you will never get back, and all for 5 cents. I felt a good deal like the man who was full and who stepped on a man who was not full. The sober man was mad and yelled out, "See here, condemn it, can't you look where you're walking?" "Bet your life," says the inebriate, "but trouble is to walk where I'm looking." The Poor Blind Pig. I have just been over to the falls of Minnehaha. In fact, I have been quite a tourist and summer resorter this season, having saturated my system with 19 different styles of mineral water in Wisconsin alone, and tried to win the attention of 19 different styles of head waiters at these summer hotels. I may add in passing that the summer hotels of Wisconsin and Minnesota have been crowded full the past season, and more room will have to be added before another season comes around. The motto of the summer hotel seems to be, "Unless ye shall feed the waiter, behold ye shall in no wise be fed." Many waiters at these places, by a judicious system of blackmail and starvation, have reduced the guest to a sad state. The mineral water of Wisconsin ranks high as a beverage. Many persons are using it during the entire summer in place of rum. The water of Waukesha does not appear to taste of any mineral, although an analysis shows the presence of several kinds of groceries in solution. The water at Palmyra Springs also tastes like any other pure water, but at Kankana on the Fox River, they have a style of mineral water which is different. Almost as soon as you taste it, you discover that it is extremely different. Colonel Watrous of the Milwaukee Sunday Telegraph took some of it. I saw him afterward. He looked depressed and told me that he had been deceived. Several Kankana people had told him that this was a living water. He had discovered otherwise. He hated to place his confidence in people and then find it misplaced. A favorite style of Kankana revenge is to drink a quart of this water, and then, on meeting an enemy, to breathe on him and wither him. One breath produces syncope, and blind staggers. 2 breaths induce coma, and metallic casket for 1. Minnehaha is not mineral water. It is just plain water, giving itself away, day after day, like a fresh young man in society. If you want pure water, you get it at the spring near the foot of the fall, and if you want it flavored, with something that will leave a blazed road the whole length of your alimentary canal, you go to the Blind Pig, a few rods away from the falls. The Blind Pig draws many people toward the falls through sympathy. To be blind must indeed be a sad plight. Let us pause and reflect on this proposition. By good fortune, I have had the chance to watch the rum problem in all its phases this summer, beginning in Maine, where the most ingenious methods of whipping the devil around the stump are adopted, then going through northern Iowa and tasting her exhilarating pop, and at last paying 10 cents to see the Blind Pig in Minnehaha. I feel like one who has wrestled with the temperance problem in a practical way, and I have about decided that a high license is about the only way to make the sale of whiskey odious. Prohibition is too abrupt in its methods, and one generation can hardly wipe out the appetite for liquor that has been planted and fostered by 50 preceding generations. For fear that a few of my lady readers do not know what the Minnehaha Blind Pig looks like, and that they may be curious about it, I will just say that it is a method of evading the law, and consists of a dumbwaiter, wherein if you pay 10 cents, you get a glass of stimulants without the annoyance of conversation. Many ladies who visit the falls, and who have heard incidentally about the Blind Pig, express a desire to see the poor little thing, but their husbands generally persuade them to refrain. Minnehaha is a beautiful waterfall. It is not so frightfully large and grand as Niagara, but it is very fine. And if the state of Minnesota would catch the man who nails his signs on the trees around there, and choke him to death near the falls on a pleasant day, a large audience would attend with much pleasure. I believe that the fence board advertiser is not only, as a rule, wicked, but he also lacks common sense. Who ever bought a liver pad or a corset because he read about it on a high-board fence? No one. Who ever purchased a certain kind of pill or poultice because the name of that pill or poultice was nailed on a tree, to disfigure a beautiful landscape? I do not believe that any sane human being ever did so. If everyone feels as I do about it, People would rather starve to death for pills and freeze to death in a perfect wilderness of liver pads than buy of the man who daubs the fair face of nature with names of his alleged goods. I saw a squaw who seemed to belong in the picture of the poetic little waterfall. I did not learn her name. It was one of these long corduroy Sioux names that hang together with hyphens like a lot of sausage. The salaried humorist of the party said he never saw such a name before. Translated into our tongue, it meant the swift daughter of the prairie blizzard that gathers the huckleberry on the run and don't you forget it. End of section 92. Section 93 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE. Section 93. Daniel Webster. I presume that Daniel Webster was as good an offhand speaker as this country has ever produced. Massachusetts has been well represented in Congress since that time, but she has had few who could successfully compete with Daniel Webster, Esquire, attorney and counselor at law, Boston, Mass. I have never met Mr. Webster, but I have seen a cane that he used to wear, and since that time I have felt a great interest in him. It was a heavy winter cane, and was presented to him as a token of respect. This reminds me of an inscription on a gravestone in the 280-year-old churchyard at La Pointe on Lake Superior, where I was last week. It shows what punctuation has done for a lost and undone race. I copy the inscription exactly as it appears. Louis Rochdejew, shot, as a mark of esteem by his brother. Daniel Webster had one of the largest and most robust brains that ever flourished in our fair land. It was what we frequently call a teeming brain, one of those four-horse teeming brains, as it were. Mr. Webster wore the largest hat of any man then in Congress, and other senators and representatives used to frequently borrow it to wear on the 2nd of January, the 5th of July, and after other special occasions, when they had been in executive session most all night and endured great mental strain. This hat matter reminds me of an incident in the life of Benjamin F. Butler, a man well known in Massachusetts even at the present time. One evening at a kind of reception or some such dissipation as that, while Jim Nye was in the Senate, the latter left his silk hat on the lounge with the opening turned up, and while he was talking with someone else, Mr. Butler sat down in the hat with so much expression that it was a wreck. Everyone expected to see James W. Nye walk up and smite Benjamin F. Butler, but he did not do so. He looked at the chaotic hat for a minute, more in sorrow than in anger, and then he said, "Benjamin, I could have told you that hat wouldn't fit you before you tried it on." Daniel Webster's brain was not only very large, but it was in good order all the time. Sometimes nature bestows large brains on men who do not rise to great prominence. Large brains do not always indicate great intellectual power. These brains are large, but of an inferior quality. A schoolmate of mine used to wear a hat that I could put my head and both feet into with perfect ease. I remember that he tied my shirt one day while I was laying my well-rounded limbs in the mill pond near my childhood's home. I was mad at the time, but I could not lick him, for he was too large. All I could do was to patiently untie my shirt while my teeth chattered, then fling a large three-cornered taunt in his teeth and run. He kept on poking fun at me, I remember, till I got dressed, and alluded incidentally to my small brain and abnormal feet. This stung my sensitive nature, and I told him that if I had such a wealth of brain as he had, and it was of no use to think with, I would take it to a restaurant and have it breaded. Then I went away. But we were speaking of Mr. Webster. Many lawyers of our day would do well to read and study the illustrious example of Daniel Webster. He did not sit in court all day with his feet on the table and howl, "We object," and then down his client for $50 just because he had made a noise. I employed a lawyer once to bring suit for me to recover quite a sum of money due me. After years of assessments and toilsome litigation, we got a judgment. He said to me that he was anxious to succeed with the case, mainly because he knew I wanted to vindicate myself. I said yes, that was the idea exactly. I wanted to be vindicated. So he gave me the vindication and took the judgment as a slight testimonial of his own sterling worth. When I want to be vindicated again, I will do it with one of those self-cocking vindicators that you carry in a pocket. Looking over this letter, I am amazed to see the amount of valuable information relative to the life of Mr. Webster that I have succeeded in using. There are, of course, some minor details of Mr. Webster's life which I have omitted, but nothing of real importance. The true history of Mr. Webster is epitomized here and told in a pleasing and graceful manner, a style that is at once accurate and just and still elegant, chaste and thoroughly refined, while at the same time there are little gobs of sly humor in it that are real cute. 2 ways of telling it. I remember one sunny day in summer we were sitting in the Boomerang office, I and the city editor, and he was speaking enviously of my salary of $150 per month as compared with his of $80, and I had just given him the venerable minstrel witticism that of course my salary was much larger than his, but he ought not to forget that he got his. Just then there was a revolver shot at the foot of our stairs, and then another. The printers rushed into the stairway from the composing room, and to save time, I ran out on the balcony that hung over the sidewalk, and which gave me a bird's-eye view of the murder. The next issue of the paper contained an account about like this. Cold-blooded murder, yesterday between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, in front of this office on 2nd Street. James McKeon, in a manner almost wholly unprovoked, shot James Smith, commonly known as Windy Smith. Smith died at 2 o'clock this morning of his wounds. Windy Smith was not a bad man, but, as his nickname would imply, he was a kind of noisy, harmless fellow, and McKeon, who is a gambler and professional bad man, can give no good reason for the killing. There is a determined effort on foot to lynch the murderer. This account was brief, but it seemed to set forth the facts pretty clearly, I thought, and I felt considerably chagrined when I saw an account of the matter later on, as written up by the prosecuting attorney. I may be inaccurate as to the dates and some other points of detail, but as nearly as I can remember, his version of the matter was like this. The territory of Wyoming, county of Albany, that is to say, in Justice Court before E.W. Nye, Esquire, Justice of the Peace. The territory of Wyoming, plaintiff, versus James McKeon, defendant, complaint. The above-named defendant, James McKeon, is accused of the crime of murder, for that he, the said defendant, James McKeon, at the town of Laramie City, in the county of Albany and territory of Wyoming, and on the 13th day of July, Anno Domini 1880, then and there being, he, the said defendant, James McKeon, did willfully, maliciously, feloniously, wickedly, unlawfully, criminally, illegally, unjustly, premeditatedly, coolly, and murderously, by means of a certain deadly weapon, commonly called a Smith & Wesson revolver, or revolving pistol, so constructed as to revolve upon itself and to be discharged by means of a spring and hammer, and with 6 chambers thereto, and known commonly as a self-cocker, the same loaded with gunpowder and leaden bullets, and in the hands of him, the said defendant, James McKeon, level at, to, upon, by, contiguous to, and against the body of one James Smith, commonly called Windy Smith, in the peace of the Commonwealth then and there being, and that, by means of said deadly weapon, commonly called a Smith & Wesson revolver, or revolving pistol, so constructed as to revolve upon itself and to be discharged by means of a spring or hammer, and with 6 chambers thereto, and known commonly as a self-cocker, the same loaded with gunpowder and leaden bullets, and in the hands of him, the said defendant, James McKeon, held at, to, upon, by, contiguous to, and against the body of him, the said James Smith, commonly called Windy Smith, he, the said James McKeon, did willfully, maliciously, feloniously, wickedly, fraudulently, virulently, unlawfully, criminally, illegally, brutally, unjustly, premeditatedly, coolly, and murderously, of his malice aforethought, with the deadly weapon aforesaid, held in his right hand of him, the said defendant, James McKeon, to, at, against, etc., the body of him, the said James Smith, commonly called Windy Smith, he, the said defendant, James McKeon, at the said town of Laramie City, in the said county of Albany, and in the heretofore enumerated territory of Wyoming, and on the hereinbefore mentioned 13th day of July, Anno Domini 1880, did inflict to, at, upon, by, contiguous to, adjacent to, adjoining over, and against the body of him, the said James Smith, commonly called Windy Smith, one certain deadly, mortal, dangerous, and painfully wound, to wit, over, against, to, at, by, upon, contiguous to, near, adjacent to, and bisecting the intestines of him, the said James Smith, commonly called Windy Smith, by reason of which he, the said James Smith, commonly called Windy Smith, did in great agony linger, and lingering did die, on the 14th day of July, Anno Domini 1880, at 2 o'clock in the forenoon of said day, contrary to the statutes in such case made and provided, and against the peace and dignity of the territory of Wyoming. I am now convinced that although the published account was correct, it was not as full as it might have been. Perhaps the tendency of modern journalism is to epitomize too much. In the hurry of daily newspaper work and the press of matter upon our pages, very likely we are fatally brief and sacrifice rhetorical beauty to naked and goose-pimply facts. End of section 93. Section 94 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE, Section 94. All about menials. The subject of meals, lunch counters, dining cars, and buffet cars came up the other day incidentally. I had ordered a little breakfast in the buffet car, not so much because I expected to get anything, but because I like to eat in a car and have all the other passengers glaring at me. I do not know which affords me the most pleasure, to sit for a photograph and be stabbed in the cerebellum with a cast iron prong, or to be fed in the presence of a mixed company of strangers, or to be called on without any preparation to make a farewell speech on the gallows. However, I got my breakfast after a while. The waiter was certainly the most worthless, trifling, half-asleep combination of Senegambian stupidity and poor white trash indolence and awkwardness that I ever saw. He brought in everything except what I wanted, and then wound up by upsetting the little cream pitcher in my lap. He did not charge for the cream. He threw that in. So all the rest of the journey I was trying to eradicate a cream dado from my pantaloons. It made me mad because those pantaloons were made for me by request. Besides, I haven't got pantaloons to squander in that way. To some, a pair of pantaloons more or less is nothing, but it is much to me. There was a porter on the same train who was much the same kind of furniture as the waiter. He slept days and made up berths all night. Truly, he began making up berths at Jersey City, and when he got through about daylight, it was time to begin to unmake them again. All night long I can hear opening and shutting the berths like a concertina. He sang softly to himself all night. "You must camp a little in the wilderness, and then we'll all go home." He played his own accompaniment on the berths. When in repose, he was generally asleep with a whisk broom in one hand, and the other hand extended with the palm up, waiting for a dividend to be declared. He generally slept with his mouth open so that you could read his innermost thoughts, and when I complained to him about the way my bunk felt, he said he was sorry and wanted to know which cell I was in. I rode years ago over a new stage line for several days. It was through an almost trackless wilderness, and the service hadn't been expedited then. It was not a star route anyhow. The government seemed to think that the man who managed the thing ought not to expect help, so long as he had been such a fool asterisk it. 5 minutes intermission for those who wished to be chloroformed. The stage consisted of a buckboard. It was one of the first buckboards ever made, and the horse was among the first turned out also. The driver and myself were the passengers. When it got to be about dinner time, I asked him if we were not pretty near the dinner station. He grunted. He hadn't said a word since we started. He was a surly, morose, and taciturn man. I was told that he had been disappointed in love. A half-breed woman named No had led him to believe that she loved him, and that if it had not been for her husband, she would gladly have been the driver's bride. So the driver assassinated the disagreeable husband of No. Then he went to the ranch to claim his bride, but she was not there. She had changed her mind and married a cattleman who had just moved onto the range with a government mule and a branding iron, intending to slowly work himself into the stock business. So this driver was a melancholy man. He only made one remark to me during that long 40-mile drive through the wilderness. About dinner time, he drove the horse under a quaking asp tree, tied a nosebag of oats over its head, and took a wad of bread and bacon from his greasy pocket. The bacon and bread had little flakes of smoking tobacco all over it, because he carried his grub and tobacco in the same pocket. For a moment he introduced one corner of the bacon and bread in among his whiskers. Then he made the only remark that he uttered while we were together. He said, "Partner, dinner is now ready in the dining car." A powerful speech. I once knew a man who was nominated by his fellow citizens for a certain office, and finally elected without having expended a cent for that purpose. He was very eccentric, but he made a good officer. When he heard that he was nominated, he went up, as he said, into the mountains to do some assessment work on a couple of claims. He got lost and didn't get his bearings until a day or two after election. Then he came into town, hungry, greasy, and ragged, but unpledged. He found that he was elected, and in answer to a telegram started off for Frisco to see a dying relative. He did not get back till the 1st of January. Then he filed his bond and sailed into the office. He fired several sedentary deputies who had been in the place 20 years, just because they were good workers. That is, they were good workers at the polls. They saved all their energies for the campaign, and so they only had vitality enough left to draw their salaries during the balance of the 2 years. This man raised the county script from 60 to 95 in less than 2 years. And still they busted him in the next convention. He was too eccentric. One delegate asked what in Sam Hill would become of the country if every candidate should skin out during the campaign and rusticate in the mountains while the battle was being fought. Says he, "I am a delegate from the precinct of Rawhide Butts, and I calculate I know what I'm talking about. Gentlemen of the convention, just suppose that everybody from the President of the United States down was to get the nomination and then light out like a house afire and never come back till it was time to file his bond. What's going to become of us common drunkards to whom election is an oasis in the Badlands, an orange grove in the alkali flats? Mr. Chairman, there's millions of dollars in this broad land waiting for the high tide of election day to come and float 'em down to where you and I, Mr. Chairman, as well as other parched and patriotic inebriates, can get a hold of them. Gentlemen, we talk about stringency and shrinkage of values and all such funny business as that, but that's something I don't know a blame thing about. What I can grapple with is this. If our county offices are worth $30,000, and there are little afterclaps and soft snaps and walkovers worth, say, $10,000, and the boys, say, are willing to do the fair thing, say blow in 15% to that central committee, and what they feel like on the outside, then politics, instead of a burden and a reproach, becomes a pleasing duty, a joyous occasion, and a picnic to those whose lives might otherwise be a dreary monotone. Mr. Chairman, the past 2 years has wrecked 4 campaign saloons, and a tinner who socked his wife's fortune into campaign torches is now in a land where torchlight is no good. Overcome by a dull market, a financial depression, and a reserved central committee, he ate a package of rough-on rats and passed up the flume. He is now at rest over yonder. Such instances would be common if we encouraged the eccentric economy of official cranks. It is an evil that is gnawing at the vitals of the Republic. We must squench or get left. There are millions of dollars in this country, Mr. Chairman, that if we keep it out of the campaign, will get into the hands of the working classes. And then you and I, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen of the convention, can starve to death. Keep the campaign money away from the soulless hired man, gentlemen, or goodbye, John. Mr. Chairman, excuse my emotions. It is almighty seldom that I make a speech, but when I do, I strive to get there with both feet. We must either work the campaign funds into their legitimate channels, or every blamed patriot within the sound of my voice will have to fasten on a tin bill and rustle for angleworms amongst the hens. You hear me? Terrific applause, during which the delicate odor of enthusiasm was noticed on the breath of the entire delegation. End of section 94. Section 95 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE, Section 95. A Goat in a Frame. Laramie has a seal-brown goat, with iron-gray chin whiskers and a breath like new-mown hay. He has not had as hard a winter as the majority of stock on the Rocky Mountains, because he is of a domestic turn of mind and tries to make man his friend. Though social in his nature, he never intrudes himself on people after they have intimated with a shotgun that they are weary of him. When the world seems cold and dark to him, and everybody turns coldly away from him, he does not steal away by himself and die of corroding grief. He just lies down on the sidewalk in the sun and fills the air with the seductive fragrance of which he is the sole proprietor. One day, just as he had eaten his midday meal of boot heels and cold sliced atmosphere and kerosene barrel staves, he saw a man going along the street with a large looking-glass under his arm. The goat watched the man and saw him set the mirror down by a gate and go inside the house after some more things that he was moving. Then the goat stammered with his tail a few times and went up to see if he could eat the mirror. When he got pretty close to it, he saw a hungry-looking goat apparently coming toward him, so he backed off a few yards and went for him. There was a loud crash, and when the man came out, he saw a full-length portrait of a goat, with a heavy black walnut frame around it, going down the street with a great deal of apparent relish. Then the man said something derogatory about the goat and seemed offended about something. Goats are not timid in their nature and are easily domesticated. There are 2 kinds of goat, the cashmere goat and the plain goat. The former is worked up into a cashmere shawl and cashmere bouquet. The latter is not. The cashmere bouquet of commerce is not made of the common goat. It is a good thing that it is not. A goat that has always been treated with uniform kindness and never betrayed may be taught to eat out of the hand, also out of the flour barrel or the ice cream freezer. To a Married Man. Adelbert G. Grimes writes as follows. I am a young man not 22 years of age. I am said to be rather attractive in appearance and a fluent conversationalist. 3 years ago I foolishly married and settled on a tree claim in Dakota, where we have 3 children, consisting of 1 pair of twins and an ordinary child born by itself. We are a considerable distance from town, and to remain at home during the winter with no company besides my wife and children is very irksome, especially as my wife has never had the advantages that I have in the way of society. Her conversational powers are very inferior, and I cannot bear to remain at home very much, so I go to town, where I can meet my equals and enjoy myself. I fear that this will lead to an estrangement, for when I return at night, my wife's nose is so red from sniveling all day that I can hardly bear to look at her. If there is anything in this world that I hate, it is a red-eyed, red-nosed woman who sheds tears on all occasions. Of course, all this makes me irritable, and I say sharp things to her, as I have a wonderful command of language at such times. She surely cannot expect a young man 22 years old to stay at home day after day and listen to squalling children, when he is still in the heyday of life with joy beaming in his eye. Of course, I do say things to my wife that I am afterwards sorry for, but I made a great mistake in marrying the woman I did, and although some of my lady friends told me so at the time, I did not believe it. Do you think I ought to bury myself on a tree claim with a woman far my inferior, while I have talents that would shine in the best of society? I am greatly distressed, and would willingly seek a legal separation if I knew how to go about it. Will you kindly advise me? What do you think of my penmanship? I hardly know how to advise you, Adelbert. You have got yourself into a place where you cannot do much but remain and take your medicine. Unfortunately, there are too many such young men as you are, Adelbert. You are young and handsome and smart. You casually admit this in your letter, I see. You have a social nature and would shine in society. You also reluctantly confess this. This does not help you in my estimation, Adelbert. If you are a bright and shining light in society, you are probably a brunette fizzle as a husband. When you resolved to take a tree claim and make a home in Dakota, why didn't you put your swallowtail coat under the bed and retire from the giddy whirl and mad rush of society the way your wife had to? I dislike very much to speak to you in a plain, blunt way, Adelbert, being a total stranger to you, but when you convey the idea in your letter that you have made a great mistake in marrying at the age of 19 and marrying far beneath yourself, I am forced to agree with you. If instead of marrying a young girl who didn't know any better than to believe that you were a man instead of a fractional one, you had come to me and borrowed my revolver and blown out the fungus growth which you refer to as your brains, you would have bit it. Even now it is not too late. You can still come to me, and I will oblige you. You cannot do your wife a greater favor at this time than to leave her a widow, and the sooner you do, the less orphans there will be. Did it ever occur to you, Adelbert, that your wife made a mistake also? Did it ever bore itself through your adamantine skull that it is not an unbroken round of gaiety for a young girl to shut herself up in a lonesome house for 3 years, gradually acquiring children, and meantime being sassed by her husband because she is not a fluent conversationalist? Wherein you offend me, Adelbert, is that you persist in breathing the air which human beings and other domestic animals more worthy than yourself are entitled to. There are too many such imitation men at large. There should be a law that would prohibit your getting up and walking on your hind legs and thus imposing on other mammals. If I could run the government for a few weeks, Adelbert, I would compel your style of zoological wonder to climb a tree and stay there. So you married a woman who was far your inferior, did you? How did you do it? Where did you go to find a woman who could be your inferior and still keep out of the menagerie? Adelbert, I fear you do your wife a great injustice. With just barely enough vitality to hand your name down to posterity and blast the fair future of Dakota by leaving your trademark on future generations, you snivel and whine over your blasted life. If your life had been blasted a little harder 20 years ago, the life of your miserable little wife would have been less blasted. If you had acquired a little more croup 20 years ago, Dakota would have been ahead. Why did you go on year after year permitting people to believe you were a man, when you could have undeceived them in 2 minutes by crawling into a hollow log and remaining there? Your penmanship is very good. It is better than your chances for a bright immortality beyond the grave. Write to me again whenever you feel lonesome or want advice. I was a young married man myself once, and I know what they have to endure. Up to the time of my marriage, I had never known a harsher tone than a flute note. My early life ran quiet as the clear brook by which I sported, and so on. I was a great belle in society also. I attended all the swell balls and parties in our county for years. Wherever you found fair women and brave men tripping the light bombastic toe, you would also find me. Sometimes I played second violin, and sometimes I called off. End of section 95. Section 96 of Remarks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks by Bill NYE, Section 96. To an Embryo Poet. The following correspondence is now given to the press for the first time, with the consent of the parties. William Nye, Esquire. Dear Sir, I am a young man, 20 years of age, with fair education and a strong desire to succeed. I have done some writing for the press, having written up a very nice article on progressive euchre, which was a great success and published in our home paper. But it was not copied so much in other papers as I would like to have saw it. And I take my pen in hand at this time to write and ask you what there is in the article enclosed that prevents its being copied abroad all over our broad land. I write just as I hope you would feel perfectly free to write me at any time. I think that writers ought to aid each other. Yours with kind regards, Algernon L. Toohey, P.O. Box 202. I have carefully read and pondered over the dissertation on progressive euchre which you send me, Algernon, and I cannot see why it should not be ravenously seized and copied by the press of the broad, wide land referred to in your letters. If you have time, perhaps it would be well enough to go to the leading journalists of our country and ask them what they mean by it. You might write till your vertebrae fell out of your clothes on the floor, and it would not do half so much good as a personal conference with the editors of America. First, prepare your article, then go personally to the editors of the country and call them one by one out into the hall in a current of cold air and explain the article to them. In that way, you will form pleasant acquaintances and get solid with our leading journalists. You have no idea, Algernon, how lonely and desolate the life of a practical journalist is. Your fresh young face and your fresh young ways and your charming grammatical improvisations would delight an editor who has nothing to do from year to year but attend to his business. Do not try to win the editors of America by writing poems beginning, "Now the merry goatlet jumps, and the trifling yaller dog with the tin can madly humps like an acrobatic frog." At times you will be tempted to write such stuff as this, and mark it with a large blue pencil and send it to the papers of the country. But that is not a good way to do. Seriously, Algernon, I would suggest that you make a bold dash for success by writing things that other people are not writing, thinking things that other people are not thinking, and saying things that other people are not saying. You will say that this advice is easier to give than to take, and I agree with you. But the tendency of the age is to wear the same style of collar and coat and hat that every other man wears, and to talk and write like other men, and to be frank with you, Algernon, I think it is an infernal shame. If you will look carefully about you, you will see that the preacher who is talking mostly to dusty pew cushions is also the preacher who is thinking the thoughts of other men. He is upending his barrel of sermons annually, and they were made in the first place from sermons of a man who also uphended his barrel annually. Go where the preacher is talking to full houses, and you will discover that his sermons are full of humanity and originality. They are not written in a library by a man with interchangeable ideas, an automatic cogwheel thinker, but they are prepared by a man who earnestly and honestly studies the great aching heart of humanity, and full of sincerity, originality, and old-fashioned Christianity appeals to your better impulses. How is it with our poetry? As a fellow traveler and seasick tourist across life's tempestuous tide, I ask you, Algernon, who is writing the poetry that will live? Is it the man who is sawing out and sandpapering stanzas of the same general dimensions as some other poet, in which he bewails the fact that he loved a tall, well-behaved, accomplished girl, 16 hands high, who did not require his love? Ah, no, he is not the poet whose terracotta statue will stand in the cemetery, wearing a laurel wreath and a lumpy brow. Show me the poet who is intimate with nature and who studies the little joys and sorrows of the poor, who smells the clover and writes about live, healthy people with ideas and appetites. He is my poet. I apologize for speaking so earnestly, Algernon, but I saw by your letter that you felt kindly toward me, and rather invited an expression of opinion on my part. So I have written more freely, perhaps than I otherwise would. We are both writers, measurably so at least. You write on progressive euchre, and I write on anything that I can get a hold of. So let us agree here, and promise each other that, whatever we do, we will not think through the thinker of another man. The great ruler of the universe has made and placed upon the earth a good many millions of men, but he never made any two of them exactly alike. We may differ from every one of the countless millions who have preceded us and still be safe. Even you and I, Algernon, may agree in many matters and yet be very dissimilar. At least I hope so, and I presume you do also. Eccentricities of Genius. Alfonso Quanternit Dowdle, Frumenti, Ohio, writes to know something of the effects of alcohol on the brain of an adult, being evidently apprehensive that someday he may become an adult himself. He says, I would be glad to know whether or not you think that liquor stimulates the brain to do better literary work. I have been studying the personal history of Edgar A. Poe, and learned through that medium that he was in the habit of drinking a good deal of liquor at times. I also read that George D. Prentice, who wrote The Closing Year and other nice poems, was a hearty drinker. Will you tell me whether this is all true or not, and also what the effect of alcohol is on the brain of an adult? It is said on good authority that Edgar A. Poe ever and anon imbibed the popular beverages of his day and age, some of which contained alcohol. We are led to believe these statements because they remain as yet undenied. But Poe did a great deal of good in that way, for he set an example that has been followed ever since, more or less, by quite a number of poets' apprentices who emulated Poe's great gift as a drinker. These men, thinking that poesy and delirium tremens went hand in hand, became fluent drunkards early in their career, so that finally, instead of issuing a small blue volume of poems, they punctuated a drunkard's grave. So we see that Poe did a great work aside from what he wrote. He opened up a way for these men which eradicated them and made life more desirable for those who remained. He made it easy for those who thought genius and inebriation were synonymous terms to get to the hospital early in the day, while the overworked wastebasket might secure a few hours of much-needed rest. George D. Prentice has also done much toward weeding out a class of people who otherwise might have become disagreeable. It is better that these men, who write under the influence of rum should fall into the hands of the police as early as possible. The police can handle them better than the editor can. Do not try, Alfonso, to experiment in this way, because Mr. Poe and Mr. Prentice could write beautiful and witty things between drinks. Do not, oh, do not imagine that you can begin that way and succeed at last. The effect of alcohol on the brain of an adult is to congest it finally. Alcohol will sometimes congest the brain of an adult under the most trying and discouraging circumstances. I have frequently known it to scorch out and paralyze the brain in cases where other experiments had not been successful in showing the presence of a brain at all. That is the reason why some people love to fool with this great chemical. It revives their suspicions regarding the presence of a brain. The habits of literary men vary a good deal, for no two of them seem to care to adopt the same plan. I have taken the liberty of showing here my own laboratory and methods of thought. This is from a drawing made by myself, and represents the writer in his study in the act of thinking about a poem. Last summer I wrote a large poem entitled Moanings of the Moist Malarious Sea. I have it still. The back of it has memoranda on it in blue pencil from the leading editors of our broad land, but otherwise it is just as I wrote it. The engraving represents me in the act of thinking about the poem and what I will do with the money when I get it. I am now preparing a poem entitled The Umbrella. It is a dainty little bit of verse, and my hired man thinks it is a gem. I called it The Umbrella so that it would not be returned. By looking at the drawing, you will see the rapid change of expression on the face as the work goes on. I give the drawing in order also to show the rich furniture of the room. All poets do not revel in such gaudy trappings as I do, but I cannot write well in a bare and ill-furnished room. In these apartments there is also a window which does not show in the engraving. I have tried over and over again to write a poem in a room that had no window in it, but I cannot say that I ever wrote one under such circumstances that I thought I would live. You can do as you think best about furnishing your room as I have mine. You might, of course, succeed as well by writing in a plainer apartment, but I could not. All my poetical work, that was done in the cramped and plainly furnished room that I formerly occupied over Nadler's livery stable, was ephemeral. I got it into a few of the leading autograph albums of the country, but it never got into the papers. I would not use alcohol, however. Poe and Prentice could use it, but I never could. After a long debauch, I could always work well enough on the street, but I could not do literary work. End section 96. End remarks by Bill NYE.